All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. I apologize for the little bit of a delay. One of the things that I realized as I hit go on everything was the fact that I had forgotten to go in and update the name. So I wanted to go in and do that real quick of the stream. So hopefully all of that should be working just fine. And yeah, I am super excited to be here, partly because I love being able to come out and virtually interact with everybody here. Please do go ahead and say hi in the chat window. You'll notice that both Megan and Dr. Sarah are there to help answer your questions, and I'll also do my best to keep an eye on the chat window and answer questions that come up. But I'm also really excited to cover this particular topic, which is TypeScript, which is probably my favorite topic. Yes, even more so than than Python, and that's saying something, especially for anybody who knows how much I adore Python, and I do. I really do love TypeScript for a lot of different reasons that I'm going to wind up covering here. So what's going to wind up happening is I'm going to have a little bit of a presentation to start out, just to highlight a couple of different odds and ends, and talk a little bit about why TypeScript and all of that. And then we'll get into the code. Now, the code isn't yet on GitHub. It will be soon. And so as a result, I'll be coding live here, kind of working a little bit without a safety net, which does mean that chances are something is going to wind up going wrong. And so I'm going to apologize, and we'll sort of debug together, but that's all right. So with that, let me switch scenes here. I don't think I've got the right one set up. I do. Look at that. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit then about TypeScript and about what TypeScript is all about. So we need to start off with the primary question, which is, what is JavaScript? Because TypeScript, as we're going to see, is going to be a way for us to better manage how we're going to work with and generate our JavaScript. And as a result, we should probably go ahead and define what JavaScript is. And I wish I could. I mean, I know what JavaScript is. Everybody here probably knows what JavaScript is. But it's funny, and the reason that I have this slide here is because it can get very confusing, because we've got all sorts of different versions of JavaScript. We've got all sorts of different versions of ECMAScript, which is trying to help define what JavaScript is all about, where JavaScript is going to wind up fitting into the grand scheme of things. We've got Node. We've got different versions of Node. We've got browsers. We've got different versions of browsers and so forth and so on. And all of those are going to have different capabilities, different features, and different things that they can do depending on where we happen to be. So when I say I don't know what JavaScript is, I'm being mostly facetious, but I'm being a little bit serious, because again, what JavaScript is a little bit nebulous. It is going to vary a fair bit depending on where you are. And this is really where TypeScript is designed to come into play, is to help us overcome some of the different challenges that we have when we're working in JavaScript. That one of the big problems that we have with JavaScript is the fact that it's weakly typed. That sure, when I go in and I create a variable and I set it to a value, it's going to remember what that value is. But if I go ahead and I call a property or a method on it that doesn't actually exist, it doesn't care, and it's not going to let me know until runtime. Or if you do something like this, like if you're anything like me, and I know I am, one of the things that I'll frequently do is I'll create a function that's supposed to return a value and forget to return the value. And so then you go in and you start running your code, and what's going to wind up happening is you get some weird null undefined error that winds up coming up. And all of this is just it's struggle, it's heartbreak, it's frustration, it's pain, which at this point you're probably wondering why in the world there's a picture of bread here up on the slide. And the reason for that is because when I built this deck, I was actually in Montreal, and I had gone on to do an image search, and I did an image search for pain, and this is what came up. I'm not sure why, but there it is. I love that joke. That's probably my favorite joke that I ever tell whenever I'm doing a presentation. Okay. Anyway, moving on from there, let's then define what TypeScript is. So, TypeScript is a thank you. I appreciate the little compliments there in the chat window. So, what is TypeScript? So, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. And I want to highlight right away, actually before we go anywhere else, the fact that our TypeScript is going to transpile down to JavaScript. Okay, there's a lot to try and break down here. So let me see what I can do. TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. I'm going to write my code in TypeScript. And eventually what's going to happen here, and we'll see all of this in action, what's eventually going to happen here is it's going to take my TypeScript, there's going to be a little process that will take my TypeScript, and it will go ahead and convert that, or compile it, or transcompile it, or transpile, as all of the cool kids like to call it. It's going to transpile that into JavaScript. It's going to emit JavaScript. So much in the same way that if I'm writing Java and that emits bytecode, or if I'm writing C# and that emits intermediate language or Microsoft Intermediate Language or IL or MSIL or missile code, depending on what word it is that you want to call it, TypeScript is going to emit JavaScript. And so what that means is I don't need a different interpreter to run my applications that have been built using TypeScript. I can continue to run this in the browser. I can continue to run this in Node or any place else that uses JavaScript. And the reason for that is because the TypeScript does not run. Let me say that one more time. The TypeScript does not run. It's going to transpile this, convert this into JavaScript, and it's the JavaScript that's going to run. So you can start writing TypeScript today. And again, it will convert that down into JavaScript. The other big thing that I want to highlight here, yes, exactly, JavaScript. Developers. Now, the other thing that I want to highlight here is the fact that TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So if you're already familiar with JavaScript, you actually already know quite a bit about TypeScript, which is wonderful. And it makes that transition from JavaScript developer into TypeScript developer a little bit more natural. Now, yes, there's going to be some new syntax you're going to have to learn. Yes, there's some new techniques you're going to have to learn. And yes, things are going to be even more natural if you're familiar with languages like Java or like C#, because you're going to notice that there's a lot of similarities between TypeScript and those types of languages as well. But if you know JavaScript, if that's your primary language, you are going to notice that a lot of the syntax here is going to be very similar. Okay, now, why use TypeScript? Well, the first reason is types. It's right there in the name, TypeScript. So obviously this is going to have something to do with types. The primary challenge that I face on a day-to-day basis with JavaScript is forgetting what properties and methods and otherwise are available to me. And one of the challenges that we have with JavaScript is because of how flexible JavaScript is, it almost sometimes just requires the IDE that you're using, Sublime, VS Code, or otherwise, to basically just like run all of your code. So that way it can figure out what your variables are at any given time. And I'm only slightly exaggerating when I say that. And as we're going to see with TypeScript, we'll be able to declare, hey, this is the type, this is a type, this is a type. And then TypeScript in turn will go ahead and automatically enforce that for me. So that way I can better see what it is that I've got coming. And then more importantly, it can detect common mistakes. If you're going to get an error, and I know, everybody that's watching this demo, all of your code works perfectly, that you go in and you write it, and it's just perfect. It works, and angels sing, and birds come landing on your shoulder, and all of that good stuff. I don't write code that way. I make mistakes. And so fortunately, TypeScript can detect very common mistakes and give me a compile time error, or oftentimes an error right there inside of my IDE, rather than giving me an error message when I go to run my code. Getting an error message when you run your code is really problematic. So using a tool like TypeScript is going to help me overcome that. It's also going to help me overcome some of JavaScript's quirks and inconsistencies. And really, the bigger thing from here is the fact that it's going to give me the ability to use modern features in older versions of JavaScript. So one thing that is relatively new into JavaScript especially, but I would really kind of argue to programming all up, is this concept of, and I'm going to be very careful here, so kind of walk with me, is this concept of asynchronous programming. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying asynchronous programming is new. That's obviously not the case. But what I am saying is the prevalence of asynchronous programming has certainly become a lot greater over the last handful of years. And you're seeing a lot of programming languages like Python, like JavaScript, that will come along or that are now getting these types of capabilities grafted onto them. And sometimes it's a little bit messy, and sometimes it isn't going to work depending on the version of the engine that you're using. And that's problematic because now I always have to remember what version I'm working with as far as JavaScript goes. And so fortunately with TypeScript, I'll be able to write my TypeScript, and then eventually I'll be able to emit my my JavaScript when I'm ready to go. So yeah. Now, there's a couple of questions in the chat here about whether or not TypeScript works with React and any plans for TypeScript via WebAssembly. I'm going to openly admit I don't have a lot of experience with WebAssembly, so I'm not going to be able to answer that question there. As for React, though, the answer for that is yes. So let me answer the question directly, and then I'm going to spin this back and talk a little bit about the demos that I'm going to be doing here. So TypeScript, again, is going to compile down into JavaScript. And I know I've said that roughly 1 billion times, so this is my billion and first time that I'm now saying that. And the reason that I'm repeating myself here is because I want to highlight the fact that you can create any type of JavaScript application with JavaScript or with TypeScript. Any type of JavaScript application with TypeScript. So you could be running this on Node, you could be doing React, you could be doing Vue, it doesn't matter. And in fact, it's even worth highlighting the fact that Angular is being written in TypeScript. So regardless of what it is that you're doing, you can absolutely do it in TypeScript. And I would even highlight the fact that with TypeScript, that it does have support for TSX files. So that way, if you're setting up your components and so forth, and incorporating the different tags that you're going to be using and incorporating the bit of code, TypeScript is going to be just fine with that and support that. Now, you will still need to run it through some form of a process that's going to manage and transpile that. That's not going to change, but it does support that capability built right in. Okay. There's also a real quick question in there about oh yeah, hey, look at that. Vue is also being written in TypeScript. There's a question here about linting, and I do want to mention the fact that there is a linter for TypeScript as well. You're going to notice that VS Code is automatically going to be using that for me. So I may get some error messages along the way because of the linter. And one of the other things that's worth highlighting is I do get asked, why not just keep using good linters, and why not just keep using ECMAScript? And you can absolutely do that. And I'm not going to get into a huge conversation about why you should be using TypeScript, why it is that that you might want to just consider using ECMAScript instead. I'll let you go off and sort of debate and research all of that on your own. But what I think TypeScript really does bring to the table is the fact that I'm working with one language, and that one language allows me to emit whatever it is that I want, is a great advantage there. And then I only ever have to worry about learning one thing. That when I'm doing courses, a lot of times students will ask me, hey, when did this feature come in? Or what new features came in with version blah, blah, blah? And my answer is just sort of always, I don't know. I don't know. So, yeah. So, uh-oh. Am I gone? Oh, okay. Am I still here? Am I on? Okay, cool. I'm back. Sorry about that. That was weird. Yeah, not sure what happened there. Okay, but anyway, yeah. So, so the point that I want to close off with here is really the fact that I just want to close off with the fact that with TypeScript, it allows me to run through one language and only one language. That way I don't have to remember what version I'm on or anything like that. So that really is the main point that that I want to highlight here. Okay, cool. All right. So with that, let me go ahead and take a look at my browser window here. Okay, so what you're going to notice is that I've got the TypeScript website up right here. And the main thing that I want to highlight inside of here is, first of all of the docs. There's a lot of great documentation that's available to you inside of here. But I also want to highlight this little playground right here. And I'm actually going to pause for just a second here and just kind of play around for a minute in this playground before I go off into my own instance of VS Code. So what this playground is all about is this is showing you on the left side TypeScript, and then it's showing you on the right side the JavaScript that's going to be emitted. Don't worry, I'm not going to say it again because I think we're all pretty familiar with that fact. I've repeated it like 20 times here. So over here, my TypeScript, and over here is my JavaScript. So the big thing that I want to again highlight is I write TypeScript, JavaScript is going to be generated, and it's going to be the JavaScript that's going to run. And so if I open up the console here, then I'm going to see my little hello world just like that. Now, there's a couple of really interesting things that are happening over here inside of the TypeScript. Now, chances are you're probably already familiar with this. So, there you go. Chances are you're already familiar with this, the console log. That if you've done any level of JavaScript, you're already familiar with console log. There's not a whole lot that needs to be highlighted there. And up here, you're going to notice that we're going to create a constant, and we're going to give this name of message, and then we're going to set this to some value. Again, if you've done JavaScript, all of that is stuff that you're already familiar with. But this part right here, this is new. This part right here is where we're indicating a data type. We're indicating a type. Again, TypeScript. So right there in the name that we're going to be concerned with types. So what I'm doing here is I'm indicating that, hey, this is going to be a string. And so even if I update that to be let, and then I said message equal to 42, you're going to notice that when I do this, it's going to give me red squigglies here. And I'm going to get a little warning message saying, hey, 42 is not assignable to type of string. Now, how did it know that? Well, it knew that because we indicated right here that we want this to be a string. And so now it's always going to be a string. And so if I go in and I try to manipulate that, it's going to fail on me. And so it's giving me a little error message here that it's not assignable to a type. The other thing that I want to mention here is this little hello world, or the other thing that I want to mention is this right here. You'll notice the string. Now you'll also notice over here on the JavaScript that it does not contain that little marker for string because we don't have those types of type hints in JavaScript. So it's just simply gone. It's simply removed. It's weightless. That there's no performance difference whatsoever in writing my code in TypeScript versus writing my code in JavaScript. So going in and doing these types of things are not going to generate more JavaScript. It's not going to slow things down or anything like that. Okay, so let me now kick on over to Visual Studio Code here. And there we go. And what I've got in my instance of Visual Studio Code right now is nothing. So it's just an empty folder. Nothing inside of here, nothing up my sleeves except for my arms. It's just an empty folder. And so I'm going to go ahead and start writing everything inside of here. So I'm now going to say app.ts. So TS, of course, TypeScript. And now I'm going to start writing TypeScript. By the way, as I'm doing this, if you have questions, by all means, feel free to answer the questions. I'm seeing a few things, coming in and so forth and so on. So yeah, ask questions. Okay, so as we've already seen, I can go ahead and I can say let message indicated data type equal to some value just like that. We've already seen this. Now, I want to talk, since I've already talked about this right here, this little let command. What let allows me to do is it allows me to overcome this JavaScript quirk. If I do this, if I do that, if I write an if statement and I say var inside of there, and I come down below, what you're going to notice here is the fact that name exists. Why does name exist? Why does this work? This shouldn't work. If you declare something inside of what most every other programming language would consider an enclosure, it shouldn't work. So what you're going to notice is that I can go in and now say let, and now name is not going to exist down below, which is really what we want. Now, there's a bit, yeah, I don't know either. Now, there's a question in the chat here about, hey, if I left off the string, would this still work? And this is a great question. So why use TypeScript when you can use Python? So there's a great question here of, if I just did this, if I just say const name equals Christopher, for example, if I can spell my own name, this is automatically going to be a string. There's nothing else that I would necessarily have to do about this. I'm getting some error messages just because it's not keeping up with what it is that I'm doing. Whoa. We're not going to get into an argument over programming languages. I love Python, so we're just going to end that right now. Okay. So bringing this back over here. Because of the fact that I'm implicitly indicating that, hey, this is a string, it's automatically going to be able to figure out what's going on, what's going on inside of here. So let me do something like this. Let me say let message, and I'm going to indicate a data type here. I'm just going to create a JSON object, and I'm going to say text, and I'm going to say hello world. Okay, we've seen this a billion times. We've seen this a billion times. But while this is wonderful for those times when I just want to be able to create something on the fly, this is not going to be great for reusability. This is not going to be great for managing typos. That if I now, let's just sneak up here and create a function that I'll call display message, and I'll take in a message. I know I've got a typo. I'll fix that here in a second. And I say console log, and now I say message.text like that. And I say display message, and then my message. What we would expect to have happen here is this should go ahead and display out hello world. And you're absolutely right, it will. And I already have TypeScript installed on my system here. And so I can now use this to create that JavaScript. Again, remember, we have to create the JavaScript. So I'm going to do this by saying tsc app.ts. And when I do that, it's going to create my app.js file. Again, this is what we're going to run is our app.js file. And so if I say node app.js, it says hello world. That's great. But let's come back over here to my TypeScript file. Now, ignore the little red squigglies that I'm getting here. I'm getting those just because VS Code has just missed a couple of things. That's fine. But I want to highlight this. I've got a typo. This is something that happens quite frequently. I've got a typo. And when I normally have this in JavaScript, and let me go ahead and create my JavaScript. Let me go ahead and run my JavaScript. Let me open this up. You're going to notice it's got the typo here. Here's the error message that I get. My error message that I get is undefined. Is that helpful? No. It's about as helpful as having an argument in a TypeScript course about what language is best. So, it's not a helpful error message. I want helpful error messages. If I'm going to get an error message, I want it to be helpful. So let's see how we can't make this error message helpful. So what I'm going to do up here is I'm going to create an interface. And already, mind blown, I can create an interface. Now let me pause for a second here, because a lot of times, the moment that I get into a conversation or a demo where I start talking about interfaces and I start talking about classes, people immediately then want to start having the debate about object-oriented programming. And object-oriented programming is a tool, just like languages are a tool. And each one is going to be appropriate for a particular time. Now, what's great about interfaces in TypeScript is, as we're going to see, these are going to be lightweight. Actually, I should really take that back. They're going to be effectively weightless. They're going to be weightless. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say text as my property, and I want that to be a string. And now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to set the data type of my message on display message to be of type message. And now watch what happens. I'm going to go ahead and compile my code. And now I'm going to go ahead and, why did that? Oh, I need to save. There we go. I'm now going to go ahead and compile my code, and I'm going to get an error message. Look at this really nice little error message here. What this is going to do is it's going to say, hey, argument of type txt string is not assignable to parameter of type message. Property text is missing. That's wonderful. That's cool. So, because of the fact that I've declared my interface, it's now going to go, hey, if it doesn't match, we're going to error out. Now, what's also great here is the fact that over here, here's my app.js, and I want to highlight the fact that I want to highlight the fact that my interface is not here. And the reason that my interface is not here is because of the fact that it doesn't exist in JavaScript. So when this is transpiled into JavaScript, it just poof, goes away. So my interfaces are completely weightless here. Now, if I come back over here to my app.ts, one of the questions was asked, hey, if I go in and I declare a variable and I set it to a type, why would I do that? Well, the reason that I would do that would be an instance right here. So if I now go in and I say, hey, I want this to be a message, notice I'm going to get some new red squigglies here. And what you're now going to notice here is the fact that it's going, hey, txt doesn't exist. So now what I need to do is to update this, of course, but what this is really doing for me is this is now catching that typo. And that's fantastic. That's wonderful. It's taking care of all of that for me. And that way it's helping me avoid a potential error, and it's allowing me to get good error messages. Now, if we stopped here, I personally, I think this would be good enough. Like, I'd already be sold. But wait, there's more. So let's put this on hold for just a minute. And what I want to do is I want to start to put together a little bit of a project here and start to set up a little bit of some basic folder structure, and then to go ahead and go grab a little helper library here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new folder here that I'm going to call src for source. And I'm going to move my app.ts file inside of there. So just setting this up, and for right now, I'm just going to close that window out because I don't care about it. Okay. I'm also going to go ahead and get rid of app.js because, again, right now I don't need it. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to set this up the way that I would want to set up a real project. So that's going to be that I'm going to set up a package.json file. And on my package.json file, I need to have TypeScript. And what's great about TypeScript is, again, this is only used to generate my JavaScript. And so as a result, yes, I could do npm init. I'm going to be lazy and just do curly braces. So what's nice about TypeScript is that it's not going to be run. So I don't need this as a core dependency. I only need this as a dev dependency. So I'm going to say npm install, plunk, plunk, npm install, tick, tick, save dev TypeScript. And so now that's going to become part of my dev dependencies. So it's not going to be needed for the outside world. Now, what I am going to need, though, is I am going to need something that's going to be able to build my, my TypeScript. And you could really kind of put this anywhere else, but I really do recommend having a set of scripts inside of your package.json file, not just because it's good convention, it's good practice, but also because you'll notice that when you go to deploy this out to like Azure or other hosting environments, that it's going to automatically look for build, so that way it can generate your JavaScript. So when it comes time for deployment, you're going to want that little build script right there, and I'm going to go ahead and add that in. And in fact, you might even consider adding in like a build watch where you also set up like a watch command. So that way, anytime I make a change, it will then automatically detect that for me. Okay. Now, the next thing that I'm going to need is a tsconfig. And what my tsconfig is going to give me the ability to do is to start setting up my compiler options. And there's going to be a few core compiler options that I'm going to want. And the first is going to be where my source is. And in my case, my source is in my src folder. Now, the moment you do this, you also need one other option. And this is whether or not you want to have it generate a source map. Remember, again, it's going to emit JavaScript. What the source map is going to do is it's going to map my JavaScript back to my TypeScript. So that way, if I attach a debugger, I can then see the TypeScript rather than trying to figure out my JavaScript. Because as we're going to see in a little bit, my JavaScript might not be overly helpful. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to want here is my output directory. And I'm going to put this into a directory called lib. This will automatically be created. And I don't need to, in turn, then have that on my instead of my GitHub repository. Again, because my JavaScript is basically just like bytecode here. It's just like assembly code that I'm not going to deploy assembly code into JavaScript or into GitHub. I'm not going to deploy my JavaScript here into GitHub. So you could absolutely list lib inside of your git ignore. The next little option that we potentially want here is the module. And I'm going to say common.js. So what module is going to do is it's really going to control the target environment that we're going to be outputting this to. And there's two main options that you'll typically be setting here. One is going to be common.js, and that's if I'm going to be doing Node. And then the other one is going to be AMD, and that's typically if I'm going to be doing some form of browser development. You can go in and check the docs for more information on all of that, but that will work just fine here. Okay. Can you quickly see the package.json again? Sure. There you go. That'll give me an opportunity to take a sip of water. Okay. And in fact, it'll also give me an opportunity to update my run of show. I get so excited, I sort of forget where I am here. Okay. So right now I'm just finishing out our working with libraries. Okay. So there is my package.json, and there is my my tsconfig. And now what you're going to notice is if I say npm run build, it's now going to give me an error message. What did I not do? Oh, right. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do because I've got a typo here. Let's fix my typo. There we go. It's not often that you purposefully write a mistake into your code. So as a result, I wasn't expecting that. Yeah, there we go. And so now what you're going to notice is there's my my lib, there's my app.js, and then there's my my little map. And again, this is managing the back and forth between my JavaScript and my TypeScript. So that way, if I started to debug this, it would then work for me. Okay. Now let's keep on keeping on here. And again, if you have questions as we go through this, please ask. All right. What I want to do to kind of round third and head towards home here is I want to start adding on some popular libraries here. I want to start adding on some popular packages. And the main one that I want to add on for right now is going to be one of my personal favorites, which is .env. I love .env, and the reason that I love .env is, well, let me explain what it does. What .env is going to do for you is it's going to give you the ability to put your system variables into a text file. So that way, I don't have to worry about going in and setting them each time I try to run my application. But also B, more importantly, is it's a nice place for me to put my keys and other things that I don't want to accidentally publish out into a little file that's going to be inside of my git ignore. Your security tip for the day, generally speaking, publishing usernames and passwords in clear text to a publicly available website, bad idea. And so .env will allow me to avoid that. So I'm going to say npm install save .env. Cool. And so now I could go ahead and import from there. So I'm going to say import, and I'm going to use this right here. And I'm going to say .env. And then I'm going to tab over here. And you're going to notice that I'm getting a little bit of IntelliSense, but it's not necessarily perfect. So what I can do is I can go grab data types. That one big thing to keep in mind when you're doing TypeScript is the fact that absolutely, you can place your API key inside of .env. So one big thing to keep in mind when you're using libraries is the fact that they're not always going to have they're not always going to have been written in TypeScript. And remember, TypeScript is all about types. So fortunately, there's this fantastic community that manages types for common libraries like .env, like Express, like Mongoose, like fill in whatever it is that you might want here. And the way that I'm going to install that is by saying npm install save dev at types.env. Now, what this is doing is this is going off to the definitely typed repository and grabbing the definitions that have been put out by a community for, in this case, .env. And this is now going to give me better IntelliSense. Now, I'm going to go grab load here, and I know that it's deprecated, and that's fine, and I'll go ahead and just run this. And what you're going to notice is that this is now going to give me some really nice IntelliSense here. So if you're ever using a package, if you're ever using a library and you're not seeing great IntelliSense, the reason for that is because you just need to go grab types. And chances are, if you're using a common library, somebody's gone ahead and set up the type definitions for you. That's fantastic. So now I could go ahead and, in my case, say load, and away I go from there. Now, the next thing that I want to do here is I want to set up a .env file here, and I'm going to put in two real quick values. Give me 2 seconds. Talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you a topic. The Industrial Revolution was neither industrial nor a revolution. Discuss. Okay. I want... cool. And then... Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and display the key values here because as soon as I'm done with this presentation, all of that's going to wind up going away. Okay, so and if you're of a certain age from about the Industrial Revolution topic, you might remember that from Saturday Night Live, but that was a long time ago. Okay, so what I did there is I set up a .env file. And the reason that I set that up is because now what I want to do is I want to use the text analytics for JavaScript. Give me 1 second here. I just want to make sure I've got the right window up. There's that, and let me move this over to here. Okay, so here's what I want to do is I want to take advantage of this cool little client library here, which will allow me to call, in my case, sentiment analysis. So I'm just going to copy this and paste this in here. While that's doing its installation in the background, I know I'm on the wrong screen, and that's okay. I'm just going to paste in this so you can see where I'm getting that from. Okay. Cool. So now let me go back to code. So what I did is I installed that cool little library here. And what I'm going to want from that cool little library here is at Azure, bloop, and I'm going to want my client, and I'm going to want my credential. Okay. So here's where I'm building towards. Where I'm building towards is I'm going to be using an external library here that is going to ask me to start doing async await. So this is where I am. Now, the reason that it's going to have me do that is because what it wants me to do is it wants me to make a call out to cognitive services. And if you're at all interested in cognitive services, I'll go grab a link here real quick. There we go. What this is a pre-baked set of AI APIs that you can use. And the only reason I'm using this is not because I really want to talk about cognitive services, although I do love them. It's really because I know that this will want me to do async await. So I'm going to create a client here. I'm going to say const client equals new text analytics client. Notice the fantastic IntelliSense that I'm getting. Ask me for my endpoint URL, process, env, and then cog svcs endpoint. And then it's going to ask me for my credentials, new credential, yoink, process, env, and then my cog services key, just like that. Okay. Thank you. So let's put my semicolon in the right space. Okay. So now what you're going to notice off of my client is I have the ability to do something like analyze sentiment. Now, the catch with doing my analyze sentiment here is the fact that it wants me to do this asynchronously. That if I say analyze sentiment, and we look over here at the doc, you're going to notice that it's going to return back a promise. Now, a promise is a core component of asynchronous development. It's basically an IOU. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this method and I'm going to say, hey, here's some data. I want you to give me a response. And instead of giving me a response, it's going to give me an IOU. It's basically saying, hey, this is going to take me a minute. So have this, and I promise you that I'll get back to you as soon as this is done. Now, this is where typically we could go in and start doing then, and then. And that becomes problematic. I really don't want to do that. So this is where async await comes into play. It's a little bit more of a natural way for me to do things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say async function get sentiment. And then I'm going to say const response equals await, and then my client analyze sentiment, and then I am fantastic. Plunk, like that. Okay. Now, what that await is going to do is it's going to Fantasia. Okay. Let me fantastic. There we go. Okay, cool. So what this is going to do here is it's going to allow a different process to go ahead and go ahead and run, but it's going to pause my code here. So this line of code at 13 is not going to run until the code up above is finished executing. And this is great because now, once I'm down here, I can then go ahead and I'm just going to console log the response here. I know that my response will have come back. That's fantastic. So I can now, get sentiment, and this will all run perfectly. This is great. This is fantastic. I know that apparently I've got a mistake up here. End point. There we go. It's the great part about doing a presentation. You get live helpers. So I have my little await right here, and I get that ability to run this. I know that it's potentially going to take a long time, but I know that my external process is able to do whatever it is in my code. I know that when I run this, I will have the answer that I'm expecting. That's great. My problem is the fact that in JavaScript, this is really version dependent. And so now, let me go ahead and rerun this. Now, what's going to happen on my app.js here? Oh, sorry, I didn't run the right package. Hold on. And now my mouse is, there we go. Sorry, npm run build. I forgot what I had executed last. There we go. We'll let this update. Okay. Now, here's my app.js file. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh my gosh, Christopher, that's awful JavaScript. Why in the world would I ever run that? And you're right. I would never write this. This is not what I'm at all interested in writing. But remember again, my JavaScript is analogous to assembly code. So instead, it's going to be the runtime that's going to run this. And what this is really doing for me is this helps me manage situations where maybe I'm going to be running this on an older system that is not going to support async await. And this is really now, and this is where I'm going to close, my target comes into play. By default, it's ES3. But you're also going to notice that I could go in and say, for example, ES 2020. Somebody in the chat noted about async await, is that still version dependent? And it is, depending on where you happen to be running your code. And so fortunately, right here, I can target newer versions. So now when I open up my app.js, you're going to notice that I've got a little bit better of an output, and now you're going to notice that it's properly using await. So the main takeaway that I want you to get, first of all, from my target option here is this now allows me to control the version of JavaScript. And if we bring this all the way back, let me go back over here. If we bring this all the way back, the takeaway that I want you to get, the reason that I did all of these cool little demos, is really to highlight a couple of big things. Number one is I wanted to highlight the fact that that TypeScript is going to give me types, that I could go in, create an interface, and voila, now I've got something that's going to be weightless and give me the ability to define data structures. I'm going to have the ability to set types on my variables and get better error messages if something isn't working quite right. And again, the fact that it's still going to be JavaScript that's going to be running, and I get to control the JavaScript that's going to be emitted, so I can take advantage of features that might not yet be available inside of JavaScript. So that is the whole purpose of what it was that I was here to talk about. That is TypeScript 101. Now, obviously, there's an awful lot to TypeScript, an awful lot to continue to dig into. I really do like the TypeScript webpage, the TypeScript docs. So definitely check that out for a bit more information. I also do want to mention that there is going to be a little survey that Sarah or Megan will go ahead and paste in. There you go. And if you'd be so kind as to run that, that would be greatly appreciated. I do want to say thank you to both Sarah and to Megan for hanging around and helping out. It was greatly appreciated. Last but not least, we are going to have another session on TypeScript and chatbots that's going to run on Thursday morning my time, so 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, and whatever other time zones it is that you happen to be on. Please come find us on Twitter. All of this content will be available on YouTube, and keep checking the meetups, keep checking our Twitter handles. We're doing a lot of I think, really cool presentations. So please come on by, say hi. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a fantastic day, night, whenever it is. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.